welcome to another episode of the PRC Podcast. This is episode number 20, Homestead. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Jake. I'm your host. With me is my co-host and friend, Ryan of RJM Analytics, our main statistician and analyst. Unfortunately, it will only be a two-person affair this time. Adam, sadly, is dealing with some personal business, and he will be out for this week and next week. And we couldn't get anyone for today on this short of notice, but we've still got a good show for you today. We're committed to this. Anyways, let's just get right on to it on the race at Homestead that we had yesterday. I thought it was a very solid event, nothing spectacular, but some really good action at the beginning and the end. I'll confess that I didn't see a lot of the middle portion of the race because I was concentrating more on the F1 race, which I'll get to later at COTA. From what I saw, it was pretty but that's to be expected. You're always going to kind of have that lull in any race, especially in a track at Homestead where the cars kind of get spread out. But start was really intense. It almost looked like, as Darrell Waltrip used to always put it, a covey of quails, like a jet fighters in formation. It was so intense. And then at the end, we saw some really good battling as well between Ross Chastain and AJ Allmendinger specifically. Homestead, I'll confess that until the last couple of years, I do think that fans overrated Homestead just a bit. I didn't find it to be a fantastic track, but I did appreciate that it was unique and that it kind of offers you that tire wear factor that you don't get at a lot of other racetracks, and it has the variable banking that's 18 degrees at the bottom and 20 degrees at the top, and it's the one track besides Darlington where you see guys literally just run basically almost scraping the wall all the way around the corner, and actually me and the guys have kind of referenced how it's kind of like a better version of Darlington, and that it races a lot like Darlington, but it's better because you have maneuverability and you can actually pass. And I think with this car, it's an even better fit because the bottom on some of these tracks actually seems to work there. You can kind of roll around and actually make some passes if you've got the guts to do it. Whereas with the old car, it pretty much, anytime you had two cars side by side, it was pretty much a guarantee that the car on the outside would get a huge run and would basically have the position at all times. But it's not a guarantee this time. You see the guy on the bottom sometimes able to make headway, and so I appreciate that as well. For me, the big story of the race, I think, was or at least biggest surprise, I guess you could say, was AJ Allmendinger. I'm not going to bring up the line that that kind of annoys Ryan and some other people. We know what that is, but I will say that was one of the best oval races that he has had in his entire career, and I'm really have to admit, I hope I'm not disappointed by it, but I'm kind of starting to buy into the hype now. I still don't expect him to be great next year, but if Kaulig is really looking this serious as a competent race team in Cup, I'd really like to see it. I mean, we saw yesterday just how exciting he can be. I mean, he's just such an engaging personality. There's another great interview with him after pit road. He talked about how much fun he had racing with Ross at the end. But that was good stuff, and probably the highlight of the race for me was that battle between them at the end. But it was just a very solid event, and I enjoyed it.
I think Homestead, I mean, I've said it time and time again, this is a track that people pretend Darlington is. With all, how overrated Darlington gets just by nostalgia and throwbacks and, racing against the track when the actual racing itself usually is very hard to pass and really, it can put on some pretty boring races, but Homestead is just, it's kind of like, and I think Merb said this in the chat too, it's kind of like the old Atlanta where, it's shaped the same way and you can really run just about any line around the track. And that just gives gives us great racing pretty much every single time. With yesterday, despite the fact that one guy was just completely dominant, I think yesterday was still no exception to that. And on that note, guess I was maybe 1 week too premature with my whole, you know, time for Kyle Larson to wake up and finally give us the type of performance that we know he is capable of this year. And what we saw yesterday is just one more uh, feather in the cap for the idea that, I mean, when he's on and at his best, there's nobody else in the sport who can do what he does. And I mean, the way he just rim rides every single lap, inches away from the wall. I mean, nobody else, except for maybe Tyler Reddick, is able to quite do that. And unfortunately, we didn't really get to see what Reddick might have had for him because, first of all, his pit crew fucked up, and then he had really bad adjustments, and he got stuck a lap down, and eventually just overdrove it and crashed on his own. But it would have been fun to see if that had if he'd been up there all day. And even I'll throw John Hunter Nemechek into that as well because he seemed really fast early in the race before he had one of his trademark spins all by himself that he had pretty much all throughout 2020, and was never able to recover from that. So that kind of left it for Larson to just drive away from everybody, and then even with that caution at the end, that screwed a lot of things up. I mean, there was really no point in the race where I think anybody, who won the race was going to be in doubt after lap 50 or so. So, but even in spite of that, I thought the racing was really good, and I thought it was up until that caution for Blaney in the middle of pit stops that pretty late in the going. I thought it was probably one of the more naturally played out, uh, solid flow to it races where like I was kind of complaining about last week. A lot of races this year have kind of had these restarts where the whole field gets jumbled up, and it's like driving your way through the field barely even means anything. But I thought yesterday we had, the guys who were up front stayed up front for the most part, but other guys could drive up there on their own and make up ground. Austin Dillon, of all people, started way toward the back and then ran in the top 10 for most of the race, top 5 at the end. Allmendinger as well. I think even Chastain, he wasn't running that great early on, and then got up there. So yeah, I thought it was probably still one of the top 5 or so races of the year. The caution for Blaney in the middle of pit stops did kind of put a damper on it for a little bit, especially when it looked like it was going to be, Hamlin who really benefited from it. And thankfully, we ended up still with Byron a couple points ahead of him in the standings, which I guess kind of brings us to our next sort of topic now that we've only got one race left before the championship round. And Blaney, unfortunately, just seems like he can't get out of his own way right now. I mean, that was all on him. I can't use the bad luck card this time, and he's now really dug himself into a hole.
Vegas too.
Yeah, Vegas too. But I still think. I mean, for next week at Martinsville, it's first off Blaney could easily win there with how good he is there, but so could Byron and so could Hamlin. At least if Gibbs doesn't, lay the total and complete egg that they did in the spring. But obviously, I hope Byron is able to hold on if it's between those two and nobody wins their way in. I am already prepared for the whole argument of, how undeserving of a season he's had because you know exactly why. Everybody's, all the results fundamentalists' favorite statistic that is really completely meaningless without context of, what Byron only has 9 top 10s this year, even though if he just made it top 12s or top 13s, then he would have a lot more. And it's just such an arbitrary cutoff. But I don't need to go over that again. Byron has had, in my opinion, the top 7 or 8 season pretty easily. Really not much of a difference between him and Hamlin this year, if any. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, note on John Hunter Nemechek. Obviously, he was in the 45 car replacing. But Wallace, the whole thing we don't need to get into, but I think he spun, it was like about 30 laps in.
It was early, yeah.
And he never seemed to recover after being very fast early. And Ty Gibbs also qualified really well for the race, but he ended up barely finishing ahead of Corey LaJoie. Let's see, I'm trying to think. That was the Blaney thing was one of, I think, only 3 cautions that we had for cause yesterday. And once again, there were no major incidents, which kind of continues a theme that we've had in this chase, which I know it's very difficult, but if you discount like all the parts failures and the tire issues and whatever, I mean, it's actually been a pretty uneventful chase when it comes to incidents. Like I think that there weren't any major incidents in the first 2 races. I think there was only like the one crash at Bristol. We didn't have any major incidents at Talladega. We had a few small. I mean, we had the obvious one, but other than that, no real major incidents at Vegas, and didn't have any yesterday. And this is, and I find that to be kind of a relief and a pleasure, frankly. To not have so much drama and just, be decided on the track without a bunch of extracurricular crap or any of that. And that's definitely a feather in the cap of races like yesterday, where, again, as you said, things could just kind of play out normally, and we didn't have too much that really affected that. I mean, there was the incident on pit road with Truex, which Denny Hamlin, of course, said, was intentional, like was a wreck. Anybody that was actually watching and saw the replay knows what that was. It's really no point in going over it. Truex, being the at least somewhat still fairly classy guy that he is, didn't really make an issue out of it. To be frank, he was only leading because of that lucky caution that happened for him. I think with about 50 or 60 to go anyways. But speaking of what you said, the most irrelevant statistic, it's not the most, but it's one of the most irrelevant statistics. I wanted to parlay that into a point about parity, which we've beaten that dead horse a bunch this year, but I really don't think that it can be overstated enough just how incredible it is. I just realized looking at the numbers yesterday that no one is going to be able to get more than 21 top 10s this year. Ross and Chase Elliott both have 19. They get 2 in the next remaining 2 races. They'll have 21. That has never happened in a 36-race season, and it's probably barely even happened in shorter seasons where we had seasons where the leader didn't have more than 21. And to even further describe that point, the most laps led. The best driver this year, Chase Elliott, has only led the most laps in a total of 2 oval races this year. And overall, including road courses, he and Chastain are tied with 5 for the most. And in most seasons, you have one driver that at least gets 6 or 7, and you probably have 2 or 3 drivers that have 4 or 5 right behind them that have that. And that's just an incredible statement on the parity of this season. And I know that we've had 19 different actual winners, of course, but yesterday made how many different winners in your ratings now?
Well, Larson had already won one at let me pull it up really quick. At the season, I know that.
Oh, I didn't remember.
Yeah, it does bring up an interesting sort of point here that, okay, Larson's other win in my system was Talladega, actually, of all races, in the spring. But, kind of begs the question as to how much of the parity this year is just nobody really kind of sticking out and dominating, and then how much of it is, the fact that guys, take the top 10s thing, for instance. Nobody's going to have more than 21 top 10s or so. And so, would you really say that Chase Elliott this year, compared to seasons in the past where you've had 5 or 6 or 7 guys who get that many, and, some even get up to, more than 25, close to 30. You know, are Chase and Ross Chastain this year not even having as good of a season as, you know, the fifth best driver in 2018 or whatever? Or is it just that the field has tightened up so much that, you know, nobody's able to even look that dominant, no matter how good they are?
I think
And
it's
I personally think it's a little bit of both.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I think you know, I would obviously take in most cases the best driver of a season as better than, you know, most other drivers in other seasons. You know, second or third best driver at the very least. But as far as, you know, my statistics with the old seasons I'm all compiling, I can tell you this much: Chase this year, although I have as I've mentioned the last couple weeks, I have updated the formula for all the past seasons, but not for this season yet. He's at a 144.41 for ETDR, which will probably improve to once I combine it with ATDR. I'm guessing that will probably improve to about 150 or so, maybe a little bit less. And most seasons, the best driver of the year is in the 175 to even close to 200 range. Looking back right now, I think 2006 is the season that I've done that's had the lowest. Actually, no, 2019 is. Kyle Busch in 2019 was the leader with a 178.23. So that this would be, you know, way less than even that. So yeah, there's just kind of our weekly sort of analytics discussion about just how great the parity has been this year. But I mean, it really can't be said enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's just very little to choose from, and basically I was gonna kind of say what you were gonna say about it being a bit of both. I mean, I think it is more just things tightening up, as well as kind of I think the luck does seem to have been a little bit more evenly distributed this year than it has in previous years. I mean, obviously some drivers have had it better than others, but it does seem like the fortunes drivers have been more equal than we get in some seasons, and so it's just again I've used the term before, kind of a perfect storm for everything. I don't think we may not ever see a season again where like we have like 4 or 5 drivers that are within 200 or 250 laps for most laps led. Now, like a prime example, what I was talking about is I was actually looking like the last 3 years. Now, you know, Joey Logano has been like about running around like a 5th to 8th place driver in each of the last 3 seasons, and in all 3 of those years, now we've said that this has been the best season he's had since 2016, and there's no doubt about that. But if you look at the statistics, in each of the last 3 years, he's led around 800 or 900 laps. And this year, he's only, quotation mark, led, I think, 593. And so he's very likely not going to get close to that number that he's had the last 3 years. And that just goes to exactly what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you look at a guy like Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney. Both of them this year are really kind of having the same sort of seasons that they've had, maybe just a little bit better, but like that improvement kind of looks amplified because of just the fact that, you know, everybody else at the top has kind of gotten worse, or at least looks worse. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say where things will go moving forward from here next year, but for now we just kind of have this sort of anomaly of a season that, you know, do take whatever you will away from it. What I was going to bring up though, in just in terms of the actually I kind of forgot what I was going to mention. So you go ahead if there's all the time, anything. So. No, you go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. I'll admit to you all, we are kind of scrounging just a little bit for, you know, stuff to talk about because this is just a 2-person show today, and it does kind of affect the rhythm a little bit. You kind of expect to hear somebody else talking
Yeah.
at this point, but that's you gotta do it. That's you gotta stay committed. If there was something else that I was going to talk about from the event, this was the last of the only 9, or at least what I would consider to be the true intermediate races for the season, which I don't consider Atlanta to be, an intermediate race anymore, even though the track technically is an intermediate in size and shape, because, it races like a super speedway. It races like a Daytona or a Talladega race. So that, combined with the fact that we've already kind of been doing away with them a bunch in the last few years, meant that we only had a quarter of the season this year run on those tracks, and that's maybe even being generous, because I'm considering, for the sake of argument, Nashville is one, even though it's a little bit shorter than a mile and a half and is also concrete. But I'll just put it in there, throw it in there for consistency's sake, I guess. Unfortunately, I have been too busy to release the numbers for the on-track lead changes that we've had for this year. But really, all I can say about that is that this was... Now, statistically, last year, I already know, was better from just a lead change perspective and maybe even an overall passing perspective. But just on the eye test and looking at the fact that, this was more of a natural occurrence with this car instead of kind of what with the 550 package, which, as much as I was kind of a relative defender of it, it was definitely kind of cheesy in the ways that, it was almost kind of like a pseudo drafting package where, you didn't go into the corner and then get off the throttle and then get back on. You just kind of matted it all the way around and just maneuvered around cars the best way you could, whereas you have a little bit more option and choice with this car. This was probably the best season of intermediate racing that I've seen since I first started watching the sport, or at least since the late 2000s. And West Day wasn't by any means the best of those races, but it was, I guess, the perfect poster child for it. Just a good, solid event. I would have said that the best one was the 600, and, well, I'll still say that it was the 600, but...
yeah, the 600 was great. The 610 or whatever was not.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. The 600 was amazing. What happened after that was unfortunate, but overall, I mean, you could really choose several of them. They're all fairly close in quality, but all of them were at least decent. I mean, I can't remember there being a season where you could say that every, albeit with a smaller sample size, like I said, but I really cannot remember a season like this where you could say that every intermediate was at least a decent race.
That's right. I kind of remember what I was going to touch on now. With the pit road incident where Larson supposedly got into Truex, although we all know it was really Truex just missing his stall and then panicking and jumping on the brakes. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it probably didn't have much of an impact because Larson would have won anyway, and Larson should have been leading to begin with if Truex hadn't gotten that really lucky break with the timing of the caution before that. Yeah, it's always fun to see the usual suspects complaining about something like that and trying to find a double standard there solely for the purpose of their own playoff hopes.
Yeah, and to add to that,
yeah, Truex did pretty much own it and admit that it was his fault. And yeah, the other thing I guess I wanted to mention was Noah Gragson once again dominating the Xfinity race, finally closing the deal, and then was 25th all race on Sunday. So it kind of goes back to what I've been saying about him for a lot of the year. It's easy to look like a world beater when you're a 4-year veteran in a series where most of the drivers are only in their first or second season. And I think, I'm not even going to speculate what's been going on with his health after the races, but I mean, whatever it is, that's not going to be something that he's going to be able to sustain uh, if he's running 400, 500 miles every week next year. So, I mean, not a huge fan of the guy, but I do hope he gets that sorted out. I mean, even then, I think he's just in for a rude awakening, and we kind of saw a little bit of that yesterday. It's easy to dominate a race in one series, and then at the same track, that in a better series, just obviously there's a big learning curve there. You also mentioned AJ Allmendinger. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to probably eat some crow on him at this point because, I've been saying all season that he looks better than he is because he's been kind of cherry picking his races, running only the road courses and the short tracks where he's good. But that definitely was the most impressed that I've been by him all year, in Cup at least.
Yeah, I've said a lot of this stuff. I think he's just more mature, and I think he just feels a lot more comfortable in his own skin. I think that earlier in his career, that he kind of had a chip on his shoulder, and he kind of had a bit of and he still kind of has it now, but it's different. He channels it in a better way now. But he always kind of had, I don't know, a bit of what you would say, attitude would not be the right word, but I think what I mean. And he got kind of taken down in that unfortunate incident in 2012 with Adderall or whatever it was. He was pretty much put in a position where his career was basically over, and he managed to recover from that. But even then, it didn't really look like he was ever going to be all that great. Like, we just see him so many times. He just wouldn't run well all the time. And even when he did, he would almost always seem to just self-destruct. And it was that way all the way through his time at JTG Daugherty in the 47 car. And once again, it looked like he was done. And yet miraculously, for a second time, his career basically was pretty much saved by Kaulig Racing. And he and Kaulig Racing are the perfect match because they pretty much seem to just come out of nowhere. And it's like you've got basically two, I don't know what the kind of right term it is for it, but
it's a great fit for him, obviously, with his personality and the way things seem to be run over there, where everybody's really close. And it really seems like the energy is just really positive. So
a nice Bonnie and Clyde thing was what I was going to say, but just a Boomer reference there. But it absolutely is a good fit, and it looks like they have more speed in Cup than we maybe expect them to have, which I think it's hurt their Xfinity program some, clearly, because their cars haven't been as fast this season. But it looks like it might be the right choice putting their focus into Cup because, I mean, genuinely, he had top 3 speed yesterday. I mean, he was making moves all day, just making 3 wide, confident moves that 4 or 5 years ago he probably would have wrecked at doing one of those that he did yesterday, but he didn't this time, and he just hold his composure. Like races where he's come back from adversity, even in the Xfinity Series on road courses and even Cup races he's had this year, I've said it before, he just has a better resilience about him nowadays, and I think that's the big difference. It's not really that he's gotten better talent-wise as a driver, he just has a much better mental game than he had before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Justin Haley has also been running a lot better lately in Cup, so I definitely think their cars are really fast, and definitely interested to see how things shake out next year with him running full-time. It's still kind of hard to envision that he'll be anything better than like a 15th place-ish driver, but I mean, you never know. At this point, I would be willing to backtrack on what I've been saying all year, and I think there's a chance that he could have a season better than he's ever had in Cup before. Still probably not likely, since I think running full-time will kind of take a little bit of a toll on him, but yeah, you never know.
And to touch on your thing about Gragson, yes, after 3 straight, I think, races where he just dominated in the Xfinity Series at Homestead, including one where he, literally ran into a lap car, that just happened to putter around at the top of the racetrack. He finally got the win at Homestead, and then that, I mean, it wasn't funny, but I kind of unintentionally found it hilarious. The interview that they gave him afterwards, the race, where he just came out and he looked like he was a drunk, just staggering around. He said, "Yeah, we kicked their ass," and then he just spent the whole rest of the interview mumbling and, "Oh, I threw up on my dash," and all that. Which, I mean, it's a serious thing that whatever it is that he's going through that caused him to have this after the race. Which, we're not going to speculate on that, but so for him that was good, and that was a solid race. To be honest, even 2 days later, I don't really remember a lot about what happened there because my memory is just that bad these days. But yes, the Cup race was a reality check. He looks invincible on that track in the Xfinity Series, but when he step up to the big boys, even in a Hendrick race car, it's just a much different story. And if it was a lot of other guys, I would expect them, to step up their workout regimen over the off season and try to address that, which may or may not be a physical thing with him. Some of it may be psychological or whatever. But in any case, I think he's going to be all or nothing next year. Like, he'll have some races maybe like he had at Michigan this year where he really surprises you and just kind of comes out of nowhere. And then races like yesterday where he does absolutely nothing and runs 25th to 30th all day. You're not really going to know what to expect from him. But I don't like him per se, but I do kind of actually hope that he does decently, because I was saying this in the chat a couple of days ago that I think it would really be good for the sport, because to me he would be like the fun villain. Like, Ty Gibbs and John Hunter Nemechek, I'm not going to mince words, are going to be easily my two least favorite drivers in the Cup Series after Harvick and Hamlin are done. And, really, I just don't find anything appealing about them, anything interesting, entertaining. They're talented drivers, and that's something to admire, but otherwise, I don't really get the appeal. But with Gragson, there's, like, kind of a Joker quality to him that, like, you don't like him and you can even hate him, but you have to admit that there's some entertainment factor there. And just for that reason alone, I'd kind of like to see him be competent, but who knows?
I've said it before that, the worst type of NASCAR personality to me is, the kind of guy who, people don't like, but then they're also, like, not even really interesting. They're just kind of, Joey Logano being probably the prime example of that. He just, he drives like a dick all the time, and then off the track, he's just, he gets out and puts on this nice guy face, says all the right things on camera, and, has this whole image of this good guy, and, like Kyle Busch has always said about him. But, then there's Kyle, who's, he embraces being the villain, and he doesn't care what people think about him. So, yeah, if you're going to, have the villain role or be a guy who some people love and some people love to hate, then you have to have some character to back it up. And, this guys like Ty Gibbs, and honestly, even kind of Ross Chastain, who, say what you will about him, but it's like or the way he drives on the track, then he just puts on this totally different persona off of it where he's all apologetic and everything. It's like, dude, just own it. Obviously, my favorite types of drivers are, the ones who have personality, but, are also really likable. The Kurt Busches of the world these days, at least with him, or Brendan Gaughan was someone I always loved for that. Allmendinger, and obviously the all-time example being Dale Jr. So, but again, if you're going to have a guy like Gragson who can really turn you off, but, you also understand the appeal behind him, or Kyle Busch as well, it's like, I find that a little bit more tolerable, I guess. So, my thing with him is I just don't think he's very good, and I don't think he's going to be very good in Cup. I see him as kind of like his ceiling is like Ricky Stenhouse, maybe like one step up from that. But yeah, I really hope he does kind of refine his image a little bit over the years and become somebody who, I could see myself wanting to be solid driver.
Yeah, I always kind of viewed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, with somebody like Ty Gibbs, it's just going to be like kind of, you kind of already know who he's probably going to be. He's like a really talented driver, except with Michael McDowell's personality, which I don't need to go into the obvious parallel there, but yeah.
Yeah, I always kind of view Kyle Busch as like a more, well, not always, but now that I've kind of gotten older and I've kind of seen it, I kind of see him as like a more stable Tony Stewart. Like he's got a similar kind of persona, but he keeps it more under control. It's it's more palatable. The only thing I will say about Joey, I mean, I agree with you on him. The only thing I can say for him is that he does seem to have a very positive reputation with fans. I mean, that's one thing that's kind of kept him from ever being my least favorite because, I mean, I haven't encountered him personally, obviously, but everything I've ever heard about him, from fans has been positive. And so I can at least say that for him.
Yeah, but not from drivers.
Yeah, exactly. And then so you have the other guys you brought up there. And yeah, that's just the thing about Noah is that he doesn't really pretend to be anything other than,
he pretends to be Tim Richmond.
Yeah, he would embrace the villain role. Like you could see him, if he was doing well enough to warrant it. I mean, he would absolutely be playing it up, and I mean, I could see that being really fun. But again, like you said, I just don't see him being that great. But I think he's gonna just, be all or nothing next season.
Yeah. See, who else can we talk about from this week? Oh, I guess Chase Briscoe.
Oh yeah, yeah. I hardly even saw that when it happened because I was watching F1. But then I saw that and I was like, oh, well, he's in the wall. That's something that happened.
Yeah, pretty much the nail in the final coffin, to paraphrase Marty Reed there, of his hopes of upsetting the title contenders in the Final Four. So, yeah, least surprising thing ever for me. I thought it was hilarious in his interview afterwards where he was like, I never wreck by myself, as if he hasn't been doing that all season. Thankfully, this time only took himself out and nobody else with him.
Yeah. And that pretty much makes it a a 6-horse race.
He and Christopher Bell are pretty much both in must-win situations, and neither of them exactly deserve to be having a shot at the title, so I can't say I'm upset over that.
Oh well.
I mean, I don't mind Briscoe. Bell, admittedly, leaves me a bit cold.
Yeah. I mean, I like Briscoe fine as a personality.
Yeah, Briscoe's a good guy.
But on the track, he can be, an annoyance. But
I mean, it's mainly just that he should not still be in the playoffs, and I mean, the only reason he's there is because of the wins that he screwed Tyler Reddick out of at Bristol and Kyle Larson at Charlotte. So,
but yeah, it's pretty much a 6-horse race at this point because like the only way that one of those two guys are winning in Martinsville is if the rest of the top 10 crashes out, pretty much, which is possible but not likely. And it's pretty much
as well now just move on to Martinsville.
Just one last thing I wanted to say. Yeah, it's between, like you said, Blaney, Byron, and Denny. Chase Elliott, he's going to make it. He'll be fine. But he is 11 points ahead, which is not the most comfortable position, but I think he's going to be fine. And I think the same thing for Ross, who's 19 points ahead. And so, yeah, we'll get into Martinsville now. First thing I want to say before we get to the picks is we all know how, frankly, dreadful the Martinsville race was this spring. It was, the worst, at least as far as points events goes, the worst oval race this year by far. And, it was a combination of things, but really this car, like it on the other slower speed racetracks, and especially the road courses, the flatter ones, has just not been a good fit for tracks like that. And In the summer, they did have a tire test where they also messed with some other things with the car, like maybe with the RPMs and the gearing and whatever. I don't remember exactly what changes they made. From what I understand, it was kind of just small tweaks, not a major overhaul. And I'm not sure what Goodyear is going to be doing for this, but I can't say that I have really high hopes for it being a great race this week. But hopefully, it will be decent. And really, frankly, just about anything would be better than what we had in April. It really can't get any worse. So we'll just have to see on that. But I'm afraid there's a good chance we've probably had our last really good race for the season because that was the last intermediate, and these two tracks coming up did not have the best of events before, but hope for the best.
For Martinsville, I mean, it can't possibly be as bad as the atrocity the spring race was, where I had to sit in 3 layers of clothes in 30-degree weather, watching nobody be able to pass at all, and not even getting a full-length 500-lap race.
Yeah, there were no on-track lead changes either.
No, yeah. So, I mean, this can't possibly be that bad, and at the same time, I also don't expect Hendrick to be quite that dominant again. That being said, with Chase, I mean, I kind of think he probably still has a very, very good chance of advancing. I would say it's very unlikely that he doesn't. Stage points, though, are really going to be the key as far as who makes it and who doesn't. And we saw yesterday that made a big difference with Chase and Byron both not finishing as well as they ran because of that caution in the middle of pit stops that screwed both of them over. And then Hamlin, who didn't get any stage points, or no, he might have just gotten one in the second stage, ends up finishing much better than them, but didn't really gain. Actually, lost points to Byron. So, yeah. Once again, thank everything holy that we have stage points, no matter who they're benefiting or not benefiting, because they really give this mulligan to drivers who run well and then don't finish well because of things out of their control. I guess that's another one of my dead horses, but drivers really need to be rewarded for their performance, not just for their results. And I mean, every single other sport, we don't act like, except maybe with the exception of quarterbacks in football, where there's still this sort of idea that they're fully responsible for wins and losses. But it's just you can't treat a driver like they're responsible for everything when you have the whole just the luck factor and the team factor and everything. Back to Martinsville though. I mean, as far as who I'm expecting to run up front, I guess it's probably all the guys on the cutoff line and who are still in the playoffs. I expect them all to be factors. Who knows who also show up there? I guess Truex probably. I mean, I'm still going to assume that Gibbs is going to be much better there than they were in the spring. And I mean, Truex on short tracks is just you can't ever bet against him really. As far as who I'm going to pick for the win, though, since it worked last week and he didn't win, I'm going to go with Hamlin again for the reverse jinx. Hope that does its magic. Although, as far as, like a real legitimate who I actually think is going to win, I guess I'm going to say Joey Logano. I don't know. Just kind of feels like one of those Logano late season type of things where he gets hot at the right time. So, yeah, really just like every other week this year, just a total toss-up until the cars get on the track.
Yeah, especially with it, even if it is just small tweaks, basically being what's I think is going to be a different package this week. So that just, and this is a day race, and there could even be, rain, which you're not going to run in that, but, that could change things too. So there's a lot of factors that make this very hard to decipher. Chase at this track is kind of this track to him is kind of what Darlington is to Truex, where he's got the one win, which was the biggest one and most important one of his career, to get to the finale in 2020, obviously. But other than that, he seems to dominate at least a portion of every race, but then either has something happen or falls off or whatever. And, I would say he's a pretty good bet to at least, lead a lot of this race or a portion and be strong in this, but whether he'll actually win is another matter. Technically, I picked Larson to win the race in the game, but mostly that's just down to, trying to be different than everybody else and trying to somehow have a chance in that contest we're having. But as far as who I really think, I would just kind of say that Hamlin is a favorite, but Elliott is a favorite. Beyond that, it's really, really difficult for me to say because fall race tends to be more chaotic than the spring race when it comes to who really contends. And if you have to just nail me down on one person, I kind of feel like we might see a continuation of this trend of drivers either not in the playoffs or not in the playoffs anymore, doing well, and I'm going to say Truex wins this event.
Yeah, it really does seem like, we're obviously at the point with Phoenix or the finale race. It's like we'll believe that driver who's not in the playoffs wins there when we see it. So for Truex, probably his last real chance this year at winning a race.
Yeah, and I just want to say right on that note.
Really,
I just want to say around that note.
Blaney, there's a chance Blaney could still get in without a win. He's 15 points back?
12, I think.
Well, yeah, he can. He gets enough stage points and a good enough finish. There's absolutely a chance he could go into Phoenix with a shot at the title and be winless.
And on that note, I just want to go ahead and say, you might disagree, and that's fine. I know this season has been crazy in a lot of ways, and that it would be fitting if this were the year where it didn't happen. I do not see anybody other than the Final Four winning Phoenix. I'm sorry. That's one it's more than a trend with that happening. We can talk about whether it's, whether NASCAR lets them get away with more stuff or whether it's just that nobody else wants to get in the way and race or whatever, or it's a combination of factors. I don't see anybody else besides the Final Four winning in that race. And so, yeah, I would say it's probably Truex's last chance. And I expect him to be strong. I haven't expected him to really contend in some of these races he has recently. I thought he might just completely pack it in after Darlington, but to his credit, he's kept plugging at it, and he's got a chance. But I'm just hoping more for anything, like I said, for a decent race. I'll have to go back and check what it was exactly they did with the package, but I think the main thing they might have addressed is the gearing, where basically the main problem that I was hearing the drivers talk about with the spring race was that because everyone was shifting, and not just a few drivers, it was pretty much put in a situation where you shift up into fifth on the straightaway, then you go into the corner, you shift down to fourth, and then as soon as you get loose or you get any kind of wheel spin or wheel hop or whatever, all you got to do is just shift up, and then it's gone, and you can just get bailed out by it every time. And, it's one thing when you have a situation like we've kind of had at Phoenix with the old car, where you have a few guys shifting, and if they do it right, it can provide them with an advantage. But when you have everybody shifting and everybody's just kind of running the same speed, it creates exactly what we saw in the spring. So hopefully they did address that, and that's going to make a difference. But again, we're just going to have to see.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is it is worth pointing out the last two all races at Martinsville, Chase Elliott has led the most laps and dominated. So yeah, just more of a reason to not really be concerned for him. I think, as we said, the cream is going to rise to the top and should be a good one.
All right, well, I guess I'll go into my F1 thing to finish. I did spend a lot of the time watching it and kind of missed the middle portion of the Homestead race, which nothing really happened in that, so I didn't really miss anything. Was a fairly decent race after what was a pretty dull start to it at COTA in Austin, where he had the good race in Cup. back in March. It was a fairly close battle and it was intense late in the race because, for starters, Max Verstappen really was just a little bit faster than Lewis the whole day, but not by much. I mean, it was close. Like, he was not, especially on the hard tires, much quicker, and so it was probably going to be a battle anyways. But then when the final pit stop happened, and his crew, I guess the gun didn't work on the left front tire, and they had an 11-second pit stop, which normally pit stops are about 2 or 3 seconds in F1, and so that put him behind. He even came out behind Charles Leclerc in that race, which was, first off, it started, Carlos Sainz won the pole, and then George Russell promptly took him out in the first corner, but, who cares, because, Carlos Sainz has already got his win in Silverstone. He's the most overrated driver in the field. I mean, whatever. But then, Max Verstappen, he had to pass Charles Leclerc and make up, I think it was about 7 or 8 seconds up on Lewis Hamilton. And frankly, as close as those cars were all day, I don't know how he did it. But he managed to make it up, and he slipped past him with 6 laps to go, but even then it wasn't over because Lewis hung with him right to the end. But he managed to dodge that bullet there, and he got his 13th win of the season out of 19 races, which ties the most wins ever in an F1 season. It ties the season in which Vettel did it in 2013, in which he also did it in 19 races. Michael Schumacher still holds the record for doing it in 17 races in 2004. But while his season, I have said a couple times, has been inflated by kind of the good fortune he's had, or at least lack of bad fortune, and the amount of times that Ferrari have just completely bungled things, it's an amazing accomplishment. And there is something to be said for the fact that he's won 13 races with 5 poles. And we know how important that is in F1 because, it's so hard to make up ground. And when you're not starting at the front, it's very, very difficult. And it is a testament to just how great a driver he is, even if he is in an absurdly fast car. And it also clinched the constructor's title for Red Bull in that case, which, us American fans, we don't really care about that. But in F1, it's a big deal, so I guess it's good since Red Bull lost their founder, Dietrich Mateschitz. Sorry, I know that was completely wrong, but, I'm terrible pronouncing names. He passed away, and so that was a nice tribute to him. And so, speaking of Vettel, he was, I think, the real story of yesterday. He was probably the best driver, considering his equipment yesterday. Passed a lot of cars yesterday. He probably would have been in contention for a top 5 if he hadn't had his own slow pit stop at the end. And he still managed to make up, I think, 3 positions just in the last 3 or 4 laps to finish 7th. And it continues what has been a strong run for him ever since he announced his retirement. He's clearly wanting to prove how good he really is as he's going out. And I just kind of did want to say on that note that it's a shame that his career is having to end this way because, it's a thing where the car that he had when he won the 4 straight championships and just had the unbelievable seasons where he led over 700 laps and had 11 and 13 wins apiece, did make him look better than he really was. But I do think there's kind of been an overcorrection, that kind of saying now that he's overrated and that he wasn't that great. But really, if you look at it, he had a really good season in 2015 in what was a fairly slow Ferrari car, and held his own several of those weeks with Mercedes, who were just unbeatable. And then in 2017 and 18, he very well could have been a real contender for the championship, but he, kind of folded mentally in both those instances. And even in 2019 and 2020, he did lose to Charles Leclerc, who was very, very young, but there's not a lot of shame in that because Charles Leclerc is the second best driver of his generation, so that's not really that big of an insult. Last year, he won the passing title. He had the most overtakes in that shitbox Aston Martin, which was, he just continually gotten screwed at the end of his career because first he got basically overtaken by Leclerc, and then he went to Aston Martin thinking that they were going to be decent. But it turns out that he went there the year that they lost their advantage, and F1 made them change their equipment, and so they became one of the worst teams, and they still are one of the slowest teams on the grid now. But he still managed to pretty thoroughly whoop his teammate, Lance Stroll, and do a good job this year. And I think that he deserves every bit of appreciation he gets. I think he's proved that he is an all-time great. His time at the top was kind of short. He did was kind of a candle that burned out fast. But still, he's always come off as a very likable guy. No one in the garage has a bad thing to say about him. And everyone's going to miss him when he's gone. But yeah, congrats to him. Congrats to Max and Red Bull. And unless you have anything else to say, Ryan, I think that'll do it for this episode.
No, not really.
Well, okay then. That's it for this week. Thank all of you for listening, for your support. We reached 25 subscribers last week, which is nice. Please keep doing that. Like us on YouTube and Spotify, and be sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TRCPodcast1. And follow Ryan at RJM Analytics. He has lots of great stuff there that we don't get to cover on the show. And hey, don't be shy about leaving us a comment on YouTube. Tell us what you liked and what you think we could do better. Every bit of engagement helps. As far as next week goes, unfortunately, Adam will still be out. We hope to have him back for the finale in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, we'll see if we can find someone good to fill in. And I also want to apologize for this show being a little bit all over the place today and scattered. Again, it was only a 2-person episode. It's a little bit awkward to do it when we haven't done it before. We've done as many as 5 people here before and usually have 3, and it's a little bit of an adjustment, but hopefully it was still a passable episode that you guys could enjoy. But like I said, hopefully we'll get someone good for next week. But until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.